in a kingdom lost to the mists of time, where the mountains touched the heavens and forests whispered ancient secrets, lived a king famed throughout the world for his legendary wisdom. It was said that nothing, no matter how small or hidden, remained a secret from him. News of the most guarded conspiracies and the most distant events reached his ears through the very air, as if the wind itself were his personal messenger, whispering the truths of the world directly into his throne room. No plot could be hatched in the shadows, and no treasure could be buried in the deep earth without the king eventually knowing the truth. His subjects looked upon him with a mixture of awe and fear, wondering if he possessed a magic that allowed him to see through stone walls and into the very hearts of men. Yet, despite his public fame, the king harbored a private mystery that baffled even his closest advisors. This king had a strange and strictly guarded custom that had remained unchanged for decades. Every day after dinner, once the grand table had been cleared of its feasts, and the boisterous courtiers had been dismissed to their quarters, a trusted servant was required to bring him one final dish. This dish was unlike the others. It was always covered with a heavy silver lid, hiding its contents from the world. No soul at court knew what that mysterious vessel contained not, even the faithful servant who carried it every day. The king had issued a strict decree that he was never to be disturbed during this final meal. He would never lift the cover to eat until he was in absolute solitude behind locked doors, where no prying eyes could witness what lay beneath the silver. This ritual continued for many years, becoming a silent staple of palace life. However, curiosity is a powerful force, and for one young servant, it became a burden too heavy to bear. One afternoon, as he carried the dish away from the king's chambers, the urge to know the truth finally overcame his sense of duty. Instead of returning it to the kitchen, he retreated to his private room and bolted the door. With a heart pounding against his ribs, he carefully lifted the silver cover. To his utter astonishment, there lay a long, shimmering, white snake. It was beautiful and eerie, unlike any creature he had ever seen. Driven by a sudden, inexplicable impulse, the servant took a sharp knife, cut a tiny piece of the snake's pale flesh, and placed it in his mouth to taste the king's secret. No sooner had the meat touched his tongue than he heard a strange, rhythmic whispering outside his window. He leaned out and realized, with a shock, that he was no longer hearing mere birds. He could understand the sparrows chattering in the trees. They were discussing the gold found in the fields and the secrets of the woods. The white snake had granted him the magical power to understand the language of all animals. But his wonder was short. That very same day, the palace was thrown into a state of frantic chaos. The queen's most precious gold-ringed jewel of immense value had vanished from her bedside. Because the servant was known to have access to the royal private quarters, the heavy cloud of suspicion fell directly upon him. He was the only one who could have taken it without being noticed. The king summoned the young man and, with eyes like cold flint, thundered his ultimatum. "You are the only one who could have committed this theft. Unless you can identify the true thief by tomorrow morning, you shall be looked upon as guilty and executed at sunrise." The servant pleaded his innocence, begging for mercy, but the king remained unmoved and dismissed him. Terrified and trembling with the fear of death, the servant went down into the courtyard to spend what he thought might be his final hours. He sat by a clear brook, watching several ducks as they rested and smoothed their feathers. with their bills. They were having a confidential conversation, unaware that a human was listening to every word they uttered. He listened closely as they gossiped about their morning. One duck, looking particularly miserable, sighed and said, "Something lies heavy on my stomach. In my haste this morning, while I was waddling under the Queen's window, I swallowed a gold ring that had fallen into the grass." The servant's heart leaped with joy. He finally had the proof he needed to save his life. The servant immediately seized the duck by her neck and carried her to the royal kitchen. "Here is a fine, fat bird," he said to the cook. "She has been waiting to be roasted long enough. Pray, kill her for the king's table." The cook weighed the duck in his hand and agreed that she had indeed spared no trouble to fatten herself for a feast. The cook cut off the duck's head, and as the bird was being prepared for the spit, the queen's gold ring was discovered inside her stomach. The servant took the jewel straight to the king, proving his innocence beyond a shadow of a doubt. To make amends for the false accusation, the king offered him the best place at court and any treasure he desired. However, the young man had seen enough of the palace and its dangers. He refused the gold and the titles, asking only for a sturdy horse and enough money to travel, for he had a mind to see the world and its wonders. When his request was granted, he set out on a journey that would take him far beyond the borders of the kingdom he knew. As he rode through a peaceful valley, he came to a pond where he saw 3 fishes caught in the dry reeds, gasping for water. Though most believe fishes to be dumb, the youth heard them lamenting their fate, crying out that they must perish so miserably. Having a kind and empathetic heart, he could not bear to leave them to such a slow and painful death. He dismounted his horse, walked into the reeds, and carefully picked up the 3 prisoners. One by one, he returned them to the deep, cool water. They quivered with delight, popping their heads above the surface to look at him. "We will remember you," they cried in unison. "We will repay you for saving our lives when the time is right." He rode on, and after a while, it seemed as if he heard a tiny, frantic voice in the sand at his feet. He listened and heard the Ant King complaining to his subjects, "Why cannot folks, with their clumsy beasts, keep off our bodies? That stupid horse, with his heavy hoofs, has been treading down my people without mercy." The youth looked down and saw the sprawling colony. Without a second thought, he pulled the reins and turned his horse onto a side path, sparing the ants from further destruction. The Ant King, seeing this act of mercy, cried out to him with gratitude, "We will remember you. One good turn deserves another. You shall see that even the smallest creatures can be of great help." The path led him further into a dark wood, where he witnessed a harsh scene of nature. 2 old ravens were standing by their nest, throwing out their young ones. "Out with you, you idle, good-for-nothing creatures," they croaked. "We can no longer find enough food for you. You are big enough to provide for yourselves or die trying." The poor young ravens lay on the ground, flapping their weak wings and crying for food. The young fellow, seeing their plight and knowing he could not let them starve, made a difficult choice. He alighted from his horse and, with a heavy heart, killed the animal with his sword to provide the birds with a feast. It was a sacrifice made for the sake of the helpless. The young ravens hopped toward the food, satisfied their hunger, and looked up at the youth. We will remember you, they promised. One good turn deserves another. Now forced to use his own legs, the young man walked for a long way through valleys and over hills until he finally reached the gates of a massive, bustling city. The city was filled with a great noise. A man on horseback rode through the streets, crying aloud, "The king's daughter seeks a husband, but whoever sues for her hand must perform a task so difficult that his very life depends on it. If he fails, he shall forfeit his head." Many brave men had already made the attempt and perished. When the youth saw the king's daughter, he was so overcome by her radiant and ethereal beauty that he forgot all the warnings and the stories of those who had died before him. He went straight before the king and declared himself a suitor, willing to risk everything for a chance to win her hand. He was led out to the shore, and a gold ring was thrown into the deep, churning sea right before his eyes. The king commanded, "Fetch this ring from the bottom. If you return without it, you will be thrown back into the waves again and again until the sea claims you forever." The people looked at the handsome youth with pity. Sure, he was doomed. He stood alone on the shore, wondering how a man could find a single ring in the vast ocean. Suddenly, he saw 3 fishes swimming towards him, very fishes whose lives he had saved. The one in the middle held a mussel in its mouth, which it laid at his feet. When he opened the shell, there lay the gold ring, gleaming in the sun. He took the ring to the king, expecting his reward. Finding he was not of noble birth, she scorned him and demanded another task. She went into the garden and strewed 10 sacks of millet seed on the grass. "By tomorrow morning, every grain must be in the sacks. If even one is missing, you shall die." The youth sat in the garden, knowing it was impossible to find the seeds in the dark. But as the moon rose, the Ant King arrived with thousands of his subjects. They worked with incredible industry throughout the night. By the first light of dawn, all 10 sacks were standing side by side, filled to the brim with every single grain of millet. The princess was amazed, but her heart remained cold. She set one final task. "You shall not be my husband until you bring me a golden apple from the tree of life." The youth had no idea where the tree stood, but he set out, walking through 3 kingdoms, determined to find the impossible for the woman he loved. One evening, as he lay exhausted under a tree, he heard a rustling above. 3 ravens flew down and perched on his knee. "We are the young ravens you saved," they croaked. "When we heard you sought the apple of life, we flew over the sea to the end of the world to get it for you." They dropped the golden fruit into his hand. The youth returned and presented the golden apple to the princess. They cut it in 2 and ate it together. As the juice touched their lips, her heart melted and filled with love for him. They were married in a grand ceremony and lived in undisturbed happiness, ruling their kingdom with the wisdom they had gained from the world.